for the hardest-hitting show in talk radio. The true progressive voice since 2012. This is Southpaws.
And welcome to Southpaws on the Pacifica Radio Network. We are the leaders of the revolution. I'm Darren Gibson, your host today. A Georgia judge is set to consider whether to remove Fani Willis from the election interference case. That's the Donald Trump election interference case. The Republicans have finally impeached Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, and they did it by one vote. So we knew this was going to come back up. We'll tell you all about what happened in just a little bit. Also, good news as the Democrats have flipped another seat in Congress, George Santos' old seat. So goodbye Republicans there in that district. Also, the Democrats retained a majority in the Pennsylvania State House. We'll tell you about that election. And the right have gone crazy over Taylor Swift and her friends. We'll tell you about that. We got some Ottawa Impact news and more as we continue the show here. Before we get started with today's topics, a couple of reminders that you can follow us on social media by going to facebook.com/Southpaws Radio Show. You can follow us on X, the former Twitter, at Southpaws Radio. You can follow us on Tumblr at southpawsradioshow.tumblr.com. You can follow us on YouTube and Mastodon by doing a search for Southpaws Radio. You can become a patron of the show by going to patreon.com/Southpaws Radio. You can listen to the show anytime at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict, Podvine, and Pandora by doing a search for Southpaws. Once you found our logo, you found us. Once again, a reminder that Google is shutting down its podcast platform in April. So if you use Google Podcasts to listen to the show, we again encourage you to please use either Spreaker or Apple Podcasts. That way we can know when you're listening and how many of you are listening. We send links to our weekly episodes to our Facebook, X, Tumblr, YouTube, and Mastodon accounts. You can listen to us on Global Community Radio Channel 1 every Saturday night at 11 Eastern. And you can listen to us on great Pacifica stations, including KCEI in Taos, New Mexico, and KZGM in Kabul, Missouri. Be sure to listen to us on your local Pacifica affiliate. Let's go ahead to our first story today. This is Kate Brumbach writing for the Associated Press. This is dated February 14th, Valentine's Day, and we are recording this show on Valentine's Day 2024. This is out of Atlanta. A Georgia judge who is deciding whether to toss Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis off the state's election interference case against Donald Trump has set a hearing for Thursday that is expected to focus on details of Willis's personal relationship with a special prosecutor she hired. As soon as allegations of an inappropriate romantic relationship between Willis and attorney Nathan Wade surfaced last month, speculation about the future of the case began to swirl. Even if the prosecution isn't derailed, the upheaval has certainly created an unwanted distraction for Willis and her team and could undermine public confidence in the case. Not for me, it won't. The defense attorney who first exposed the relationship says it creates a conflict of interest and is asking the judge to dismiss the indictment and to prohibit Willis, Wade, and their offices from further involvement in the case. In a response filed earlier this month, Willis acknowledged a personal relationship but said it has no bearing on the serious criminal charges she's pursuing and asked the judge to dismiss the motion seeking her disqualification without a hearing. During a hearing Monday, Fulton County Superior Court Judge Scott McAfee said that the law says, quote, disqualification can occur if evidence is produced demonstrating an actual conflict or the appearance of one, end of quote. He added that because he believes, quote, it's possible that the facts alleged by the defendant could result in a disqualification, I think an evidentiary hearing must occur to establish the record on those core allegations, end of quote. The highly anticipated hearing, like all courtroom proceedings in the case, will be streamed live on the judge's YouTube channel as well as by news outlets. McAfee has said it could continue into Friday. as he makes another run for the White House and faces 3 other criminal prosecutions. Trump has exploited the revelation of the relationship, repeatedly referring to Wade as Willis's lover or boyfriend to try to cast down on Willis's motivations and the legitimacy of the case. Other Republicans have piled on, using the claims to justify calls for investigations into or sanctions against Willis, an elected Democrat who's up for re-election this year. The original motion was filed by former Trump campaign staffer and one-time White House aide Michael Roman, but Trump and several other co-defendants have joined with motions of their own. Roman's motion says Willis and Wade were romantically involved when she hired him in November 2021 to manage an investigation into whether Trump and others committed any crimes as they tried to overturn his 2020 election loss in Georgia. That investigation led to the indictment in August of Trump and 18 others who were accused of participating in a sprawling illegal scheme to keep Trump in office. 4 of the people charged have already pled guilty after reaching deals with prosecutors. Trump and the remaining 14 others have all pled not guilty. Willis has paid Wade more than $650,000 for his work, and then Roman alleges profited personally when Wade used that money to take her on expensive vacations, including cruises in the Bahamas and trips to Aruba, Belize, and Napa Valley. His filing also questions Wade's qualifications for the job, saying there's no evidence he had ever prosecuted a felony or handled a racketeering case. Just under a week after Roman's motion was filed, Willis used a speech at a historic black church in Atlanta to forcefully defend Wade's qualifications and her own decision to hire him. She didn't address the allegations of a relationship in that speech, waiting nearly 3 more weeks to acknowledge a personal relationship in a court filing. Attached to that filing was a sworn statement from Wade saying that the pair began a personal relationship in 2022 after he was hired as a special prosecutor. His statement also said travel expenses for him and Willis were, quote, roughly divided equally between us, end of quote, and that Willis, quote, received no funds or personal financial gain, end of quote, from his position as a special prosecutor. McAfee said Thursday's hearing needs to explore, quote, whether a relationship existed, whether that relationship was romantic or non-romantic in nature, when it formed, and whether it continues, end of quote. He said that those questions are only relevant, quote, in combination with the question of the existence and extent of any personal benefit conveyed as a result of the relationship, end of quote. Roman's attorney, Ashley Merchant, has subpoenaed Willis, Wade, 7 other employees of the district attorney's office, and others, including Wade's former business partner, Terrence Bradley. Merchant told McAfee on Monday that Bradley would testify that Willis and Wade's romantic relationship began before Wade was hired as special prosecutor, and that they had stayed together in homes where the county was paying for Willis to stay. Willis sought to quash those subpoenas. She argued Roman's attempts to subpoena people in her office, quote, suggests an eye toward public narrative as opposed to legal remedy, end of quote, and that anything Bradley knows is protected by attorney-client privilege, as he once served as Wade's divorce attorney. McAfee declined on Monday to quash those subpoenas, but agreed to revisit that after Bradley testifies. Aware of the personal nature of some of the details that could arise in Thursday's hearing, the judge said that if there's anything that amounts to, quote, harassment or undue embarrassment, end of quote, he is, quote, not going to feel inhibited from stepping in even without an objection from counsel to move this along and keep it focused on the issues at hand, end of quote. McAfee also made clear that he does not believe arguments over Wade's qualifications are relevant, saying that as long as an attorney, quote, has a heartbeat and a bar card, end of quote, it is within the district attorney's discretion to hire him. There you go, folks. So we'll see how this comes out. We'll have details about what happens on next week's show. All right, let's get to our next story. This is Lisa Mascaro writing for the Associated Press. This is dated February 13th out of Washington. The House voted Tuesday to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, with the Republican majority determined to punish the Biden administration over its handling of the U.S.-Mexico border after failing last week in a politically embarrassing setback. The evening roll call proved tight, with Speaker Mike Johnson's threadbare GOP majority unable to handle many defectors or absences in the face of staunch Democratic opposition to impeaching Mayorkas, the first cabinet secretary charged in nearly 150 years. In a historic rebuke, the House impeached Mayorkas 214 to 213. With the return of Majority Leader Steve Scalise to bolster the GOP's numbers after being away from Washington for cancer care and a northeastern storm impacting some others, Republicans recouped despite dissent from their own ranks. President Joe Biden called it, quote, a blatant act of unconstitutional partisanship that has targeted an honorable public servant in order to play petty political games, end of quote. I agree with President Biden on that one. This is very petty on the part of Republicans. But what more do you expect from the Republicans? They've always been petty. They really have, folks. The charges against Mayorkas next go to the Senate for a trial, but neither Democratic nor even some Republican senators have shown interest in the matter, and it may be indefinitely shelved to a committee. The Senate is expected to receive the articles of impeachment from the House after returning to session February 26th. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, called the case against Mayorkas a sham impeachment and, quote, a new low for House Republicans, end of quote. Yeah, he's got that right. In a frantic scene of vote tallying on the House floor, the Republican effort to impeach Mayorkas over his handling of the southern border took on an air of political desperation as Republicans struggled to make good on their priorities. Mayorkas faced 2 articles of impeachment filed by the Homeland Security Committee, arguing that he willfully and systematically refused to enforce existing immigration laws and that he breached the public trust by lying to Congress and saying the border was secure. But critics of the impeachment effort said the charges against Mayorkas amount to a policy dispute over Biden's border strategy, hardly rising to the Constitution's bar of high crimes and misdemeanors. The House had initially launched an impeachment inquiry into Biden over his son's business dealings, but instead turned its attention to Mayorkas after Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, an ally of Donald Trump, pushed the debate forward following the panel's months-long investigation. The Associated Press refers to Donald Trump as former president. We don't do that on this show. Greene, who will serve as an impeachment manager in a potential Senate trial, hugged Scalise afterward and posed for photos with other lawmakers. She said the senators, quote, better pay attention to the American people and how they feel, and then they need to read our articles of impeachment, end of quote. No, Marjorie Taylor Greene better watch what she says, because she's probably going to be next to get voted out after Bobo. I can't stand her. I absolutely loathe her. I loathe her and Trump and Cruz and Boebert and pretty much all the Republicans. Definitely loathe. Border security is shot to the top of campaign issues, with Trump, the Republican frontrunner for the presidential nomination, insisting he will launch, quote, the largest domestic deportation operation in American history, end of quote, if he retakes the White House. Various House Republicans have prepared legislation to begin deporting migrants who were temporarily allowed into the U.S. under the Biden administration's policies, many as they await adjudication of asylum claims. In stark language at a weekend rally in South Carolina, Trump said, quote, we have no choice, end of quote. Yeah, we got a choice, and the choice is to vote for Biden, because that's what I'm going to do. I don't care what you folks do, but I'm voting for Biden. We need to keep Trump out, period, end of story. At the same time, Johnson rejected a bipartisan Senate border security package Mayorkas had spent weeks negotiating. But the Speaker has been unable to advance his Republicans' own proposal, which is a non-starter in the Senate. In a statement after the vote, Biden said, quote, Congress needs to act to give me, Secretary Mayorkas, and my administration the tools and resources needed to address the situation at the border, end of quote. 3 Republican representatives who broke ranks last week over the Mayorkas impeachment, Ken Buck of Colorado, Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin, and Tom McClintock of California, all did so again Tuesday. With a 219 to 212 majority, Johnson had few votes to spare. His margin got even smaller later Tuesday night when New York Democrat Thomas Suozzi won a special election to the seat once held by Republican George Santos before his expulsion from Congress. Several leading conservative scholars, along with former Homeland Security secretaries from both Republican and Democratic administrations, have dismissed the Mayorkas impeachment as unwarranted or a waste of time. Democratic Representative Jamie Raskin of Maryland said what the Republicans, quote, have succeeded in doing is degrading and tarnishing the constitutional meaning of impeachment, end of quote. But Scalise told reporters after the vote, quote, it sends a message that we're not just going to sit by while the Secretary of Homeland Security fails to do his job at keeping our homeland safe, end of quote. Yeah, Scalise is getting his comeuppings. I'm telling you that right now. Karma, Steve, karma. Mayorkas is not the only Biden administration official the House Republicans want to impeach. They have filed legislation to impeach a long list, including Vice President Kamala Harris, Attorney General Merrick Garland, FBI Director Christopher Wray, and Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. Never before has a sitting cabinet secretary been impeached, and it was nearly 150 years ago that the House voted to impeach President Ulysses S. Grant's Secretary of War, William Belknap, over a kickback scheme in government contracts. He resigned before the vote. Mayorkas, who did not appear to testify before the impeachment proceedings, put the border crisis squarely on Congress for failing to update immigration laws during a time of global migration. Over the weekend on NBC, Mayorkas said, quote, there is no question that we have a challenge, a crisis at the border, and there is no question that Congress needs to fix it, end of quote. Johnson and the Republicans have pushed back, arguing that the Biden administration could take executive actions, as Trump did, to stop the number of crossings, though the courts have questioned and turned back some of those efforts. Mayorkas said, quote, we always explore what options are available to us that are permissible under the law, end of quote. Last week's failed vote to impeach Mayorkas, a surprise outcome rarely seen on such a high-profile issue, was a stunning display in the chamber that has been churning through months of GOP chaos since the ouster of the previous House Speaker. At the time, Representative Al Green, Democrat of Texas, who had been hospitalized for emergency abdominal surgery, made a surprise arrival, wheeled into the chamber in scrubs and socks to vote against it, leaving the vote tied and leading to its failure. Describing his painstaking route from the hospital bed to the House floor, Green said, quote, obviously you feel good when you can make a difference. All I did was what I was elected to do, and that was to cast my vote on the issues of our time using the best judgment available to me, end of quote. Republican holdout Gallagher, who had served as a Marine, announced over the weekend that he would not be seeking re-election in the fall, joining a growing list of serious-minded Republican lawmakers heading for the exits. Yeah. And here's the thing, they'll probably be replaced by hardcore maggots. I'm just calling it what it is. You better get out and vote Democratic, folks. Plain and simple. There's two parties. Any third parties have zero chance. Sorry, they don't. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., no chance. None of them have a chance. Snowball's chance in hell. I'm sorry, that's the way it is, because that's the way that the two-party system wants it. They want to be the ones to carry the ball, and if they don't like it, they'll take it home. And that's what they've done since the late 1970s. You know, tell me, when was the last independent presidential candidate that won a state? My guess is John Anderson, which I'll have to take a look at that issue and see if it was Anderson or if it was, God, I can't think of his name. The guy that said that there's a huge sucking sound. I'll remember his name at some point during the show. I know I will. But in the meantime, let's get to our next story. This is Anthony Izagiri writing for the Associated Press. This is dated February 14th. Democrat Tom Suozzi won a special election for a U.S. House seat in New York on Tuesday, coming out on top in a politically mixed suburban district in a victory that could lift his party's hopes heading into a fiercely contested presidential election later this year. Suozzi defeated Republican Mazi Pilip to take the seat that was left vacant when George Santos, also a Republican, was expelled from Congress. The victory marks a return to Washington for Suozzi, who represented the district for 3 terms before giving it up to run unsuccessfully for governor. It's unclear how long his next stint on Capitol Hill will last, as a redistricting process unfolds that could reshape the district. But for now, the result narrows the already slim Republican majority in the House. and it provides Democrats a much-needed win in New York City's Long Island suburbs, where the GOP showed surprising strength in recent elections. Suozzi stressed his campaign trail theme of bipartisan cooperation in a victory speech that was briefly interrupted by protesters criticizing his support of Israel. Acknowledging the demonstrators, he said, quote, "There are divisions in our country where people can't even talk to each other. All they can do is yell and scream at each other. That's not the answer to the problems we face in our country. The answer is to try and bring people together to try and find common ground. The way to make our country a better place is to try and find common ground. It's not easy to do, it is hard to do," end of quote. Suozzi's win will likely reassure Democrats that they can perform well in suburban communities across the nation, which will be critical to the party's efforts to retake control of the U.S. House and re-elect President Joe Biden. Still, forecasting for November could be complicated given that turnout, already expected to be low given the abbreviated race, was potentially hampered by a storm that dumped several inches of snow on the district on Election Day. Both campaigns offered voters free rides to the polls as plows cleared wet slush from the roads. In the short term, the result could be a factor in ultra-tight votes in the House, where Republicans hold just a 219 to 212 majority. In an example of how important one seat can be, House Republicans voted Tuesday night to impeach Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas by a single vote, punishing the Biden administration over its border policies. At a polling place on Long Island earlier in the day, 59-year-old Eliezer Sarias said he cast a ballot for Suozzi because the former congressman appeared more able to work with the opposing party to reach agreements and end congressional gridlock. After voting at a middle school in Levittown, Sarias said, quote, "The constituents elect our officials to perform a certain job, and we've already had a very stagnant congressional year. Even with the migrants now, we had bipartisan deal in Congress, and suddenly it evaporated. Like, why? Do we really need to wait for another president to come? Or aren't the issues that are pressing to everyone important at the moment?" End of quote. On the campaign trail, Suozzi, a political centrist, leaned into some of the same issues that Republicans have used to bash Democrats, calling for tougher U.S. border policies and a rollback of New York laws that made it tougher for judges to detain criminal suspects awaiting trial. The unusual midwinter election became necessary after Santos was ousted by his colleagues in December, partway through his first term. Santos won office in what had been a reliably Democratic district partly by falsely portraying himself as an American success story, a son of working-class immigrants who made himself into a wealthy Wall Street dealmaker. But many elements of Santos's life story were later exposed as fabrications, and he was indicted on multiple charges, including allegations that he stole money from Republican donors. He has pleaded not guilty. With no time for a primary before the special election, Democrats nominated Suozzi, a political centrist well known to voters in the district. Republican leaders turned to Philip, a relatively unknown candidate with a unique personal backstory. Born in Ethiopia, she migrated to Israel as part of Operation Solomon and served in Israel's defense forces before eventually moving to the U.S. and winning a seat in Nassau County's legislature in 2021. Philip conceded the race and said she congratulated Suozzi in a phone call Tuesday night. She told supporters at her election watch party, quote, "Yes, we lost, but it doesn't mean we are going to end here," end of quote. I think it does, actually. Biden's campaign manager was quick to link the victory to the upcoming presidential race. Julie Chavez Rodriguez said, quote, "Donald Trump lost again tonight. When Republicans run on Trump's extreme agenda, even in a Republican-held seat, voters reject them," end of quote. Trump responded to the result in a post on his social media site, Truth Social, calling Philip, quote, "a very foolish woman who is running in a race where she didn't endorse me and tried to straddle the fence when she would have easily won if she understood anything about modern-day politics in America," end of quote. Really? Trump, you don't understand what's going on because you're addle-brained, moron, idiot, imbecile. The short campaign was dominated by issues, abortion, immigration, and crime, that are expected to shape crucial suburban races nationwide in this year's battle for control of Congress. Despite being an international immigrant once herself, Phillip hammered Suozzi over an influx of asylum seekers into New York City, accusing Democrats and Biden of failing to secure the U.S. southern border. In response, Suozzi spent much of the campaign talking about the need to strengthen border policy, pointing out times when he bucked his own party on the issue while in Congress. In the final stretch, Suozzi said he would support a temporary closure of the border to slow the number of arrivals, similar to comments that Biden has made. Suozzi counterattacked Phillip on abortion, saying she couldn't be trusted to protect abortion rights in places like New York where it remains legal. Phillip said she is personally against abortion but wouldn't force her beliefs on others and would oppose any attempt by Congress to impose a nationwide ban. Really? I don't believe that. I'm sorry, I just don't. She has also said that mifepristone, an abortion medication, should be available nationally. Both candidates expressed unwavering support for Israel and its conflict with Hamas, even appearing side by side in an unusual joint event intended to convey solidarity. Democrats and Republicans will get a chance to fight over the congressional seat again in November's general election, though the battleground may look different. That's because the state's congressional districts are set to be redrawn again in the next few months because of a court order. Democrats who dominate state government are widely expected to try to craft more favorable lines for their candidates. New York is expected to play an outsized role in determining control of Congress this year, with competitive races in multiple contests in the suburban and exurban rings around New York City. So there's the latest of what's happened with George Santos' seat. But right now, let's head a little bit west of New York State into Pennsylvania. This is Brooke Schultz writing for the Associated Press. This is dated February 13th out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Democrats retained their slim majority in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives on Tuesday after voters elected a former school board member to represent them in a Philadelphia suburb that has been trending more to the left. Jim Prokopiak's election of the Bucks County seat will give Democrats a 102 to 100 majority in the House, which they have sought to defend in 4 special elections in the last year. A Republican lawmaker's resignation last week shifted the power back to Democrats, and Prokopiak's win kept it in place. He defeated Republican challenger Candace Cabanas and will replace former state Representative John Galloway, who resigned to serve as a magisterial judge. Cabanas has said previously she plans to run again during the general election. In a statement, Prokopiak said, quote, "What I heard from voters is that Bucks County residents need help supporting their families, want control over their own bodies, and ensure they have the ability to chart their own paths in life. I'm committed to taking my conversations with voters to Harrisburg and making their dreams a reality." End of quote. While campaigning, the 49-year-old Prokopiak said his goals as a lawmaker aligned with the party's larger ambitions since they retook the chamber. More money for K-12 education, preserving access to abortions, and a higher minimum wage. He added, quote, "No one can afford to live on the federal minimum wage in this area. If we're going to be talking about good-paying jobs and creating life-sustaining jobs, the first thing we have to do is raise the minimum wage because it's clear that it's not sustaining anybody." End of quote. Democrats have kept all 6 seats that have gone up for special elections in the past year in mostly reliably Democratic districts. Prokopiak will represent a seat that has favorably elected Democrats in past election cycles. Galloway's seat had trended Democratic, and Republicans have slowly been losing their grip on the county as a whole. The race drew national attention from the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee, which spent $50,000 to protect the party's majority in the chamber. It was a first step for the committee, which has said it is planning to spend at least $60 million on state house races nationally this cycle, the group's largest ever budget. It will feature special emphasis on erasing GOP majorities in Arizona and New Hampshire and in the Pennsylvania Senate, while holding small Democratic majorities claimed in 2022 in Minnesota and Michigan. Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee President Heather Williams said in a statement, quote, "This victory is a promising sign for Democrats up and down the ballot this year. It's clear the momentum is on our side." End of quote. She added that their focus will be on defending the House majority and flipping the state Senate. Democrats in Pennsylvania have used their newfound power this year to advance a number of the caucus's priorities, and they have a philosophical ally in the governor's office with Democratic Governor Josh Shapiro. The legislature remains politically divided with a firm Republican majority in the Senate. Prokopiak said previously, quote, over the last year, I think, since the Democrats have been in the majority, they've pushed legislation that has helped the middle class. I want to do that, end of quote. So good, Pennsylvania is becoming more liberal, as is Michigan, as is Minnesota. I didn't realize Minnesota had started to become a purple state, but apparently they had. Right now, let's go to our next story. This will be your laugh of the day today. Listen to this. This is Catherine Huggins writing for thedailydot.com in the tech section. This is published February 12th. If any of you watched the Super Bowl, you know that Taylor Swift was in a box alongside several of her friends, including singer Ice Spice. So now there's been a new conspiracy about Taylor Swift and now Ice Spice. Ice Spice is the subject of a new conspiracy theory following her appearance alongside Taylor Swift at Super Bowl 58 on Sunday. The rapper is being called a demon after a number of right-wing X accounts took issue with her wearing an upside-down cross and, quote-unquote, throwing up demonic signs. Yeah, the devil horns. The gesture, called the sign of the horns, now we call them devil horns, is frequently used in heavy metal and has been popularized by prominent bands including Black Sabbath, among others. Wow, they're really throwing back to Black Sabbath. There's newer bands that also use the demon horns as well. One account on X wrote this, quote, nothing to see here, just Taylor Swift's guest Ice Spice throwing up demonic signs while wearing an upside-down cross, making sure the world sees it on the big screen. Demons, end of quote. And demons is all in capital letters. One user replied, quote, OMG, why are demons everywhere? End of quote. The popular right-wing X account, End Wokeness, bought into the conspiracy as well, adding that Ice Spice was sporting Balenciaga. The account posted, quote, demonic hand gestures on the big screen, upside-down cross, Balenciaga sleeve, not even hiding it, end of quote. The luxury brand has come under fire in 2022 for an ad that featured children holding teddy bears outfitted with sexually suggestive bondage gear. Oh my, I didn't see this ad. You have got to be joking. The ad prompted the hashtag cancel Balenciaga trend on social media and conspiracists to amplify violent and satanic images posted by stylist Lana Volkova, though Volkova had not worked with the brand since 2017. For its part, Balenciaga apologized for the ad, admitting to a series of grievous errors and condemning child abuse, writing on Instagram, quote, it was never our intent to include it in our narrative, end of quote. Well, then why shoot the images in the first place? What the hell? I just don't understand that. Unbelievable. Multiple celebrities, including Kim Kardashian, publicly distanced themselves from Balenciaga due to the ad, though Kardashian has since been spotted sporting its designs once again. Conservative poster Robbie Starbuck wrote, quote, pretend it's all innocent with the cross and hand gestures. Why would anyone wear Balenciaga after they sexually exploited kids in a set of ads? End of quote. Ice Spice was featured on screen multiple times, attending the game with Swift to root for the Kansas City Chiefs and Swift's boyfriend, Chiefs tight end Travis Kelce. Both Swift and Kelce have been frequent targets of conservatives due to their vocal opposition to Donald Trump and endorsement of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine, respectively. Prior to the Chiefs' Super Bowl win, some right-wingers had suggested the game would be fixed to boost a possible presidential endorsement from Kelce and Swift. Wow. Cuckoo, cuckoo. The video clip of Ice Spice was quickly linked to Swift as well as by right-wing critics. One ex-user wrote, quote, Taylor Swift enjoying herself at the Super Bowl pounding beers with Satanists, end of quote. Ooh, Satanists are such bad people. Ooh, they're coming to get you, you Christian conservatives. That's why these Christian conservatives are so scared that the largest majority in religion now is the nuns, none of the above. Atheists, agnostics, nothing in particular. Wow. Someone else posted on X, quote, Taylor Swift worships Satan. Been trying to tell you all this for like a year, end of quote. Another person wrote this criticism, quote, Taylor Swift made a statement tonight. She worships satanic friends and rather be a role model by drinking in front of young girls than being a responsible role model and not being a frat party girl at 30, end of quote. So Taylor Swift's not allowed to have a good time. Travis Kelce is not allowed to have an emotional outburst at his coach. You know, I'm sorry. The same people that criticize Travis Kelce, and Kelce did apologize for it, those same people are all complainers about, well, I'll put it like this. Some of them complain that some professional football players just don't have the fire in them to play and play at a top level. There was criticism about Patrick Mahomes yelling at referees a few weeks ago and crying on the field. Patrick Mahomes is an intense individual. So is Travis Kelce. You got to be intense to win 3 Super Bowls in the past 5 years and winning 2 back-to-back. If you're not intense, you're not going to go anywhere. I just don't get it. I don't understand it. Yeah, I can see where what Travis Kelce did could be seen as a red flag for Taylor Swift because, yeah, if he's going to be that violent toward his coach, grabbing him and startling him, then he might do the same to Taylor Swift. I'm just going to tell you like this, innocent until proven guilty. You don't know Travis Kelce, neither do I. You don't know Taylor Swift, neither do I. Stop making assumptions about things you see on television. Sorry, I'm disagreeing on this one. I'm vehemently disagreeing. Like I said, if you don't have the fire to play professional football, you shouldn't even be on the field in the first place. It's the same with pretty much anything that you do, anything that you have a passion about. In my case, it's radio. If you're not passionate about it, why are you in it? Why are you doing it? It just doesn't make sense to me. All right, let's get to our next story as we approach Michigan and head toward Ottawa County. This is Sarah Leach writing for the Holland Sentinel. This is dated February 13th. The Ottawa County Board of Commissioners appeared to move closer to parting ways with Administrator John Gibbs on Tuesday. Yes, we told you about this several weeks ago. Gibbs wrote a threatening letter to the board saying, if you fire me, you try to fire me with cause, then you're going to hear from my attorney. Let me continue the story here. In a last-minute change to the board's agenda, the board approved, quote, the authorization to retain legal services of Brooke Bissonette and his firm Guinan Bissonette, PLLC, to provide legal services in connection with the January 15th, 2024 letter to the board from Butzel regarding John Gibbs, end of quote. The board also approved a, quote, a hiring freeze and transfer freeze that applies to proposed hires and transfers by Gibbs, effective immediately until further notice, end of quote. Oh, wow. They're really going to war on this one. First it was with Adeline Hambley, the health officer. Now they're going after their own guy that they appointed to be the board administrator, the county administrator. Gibbs, who we refer to on this show as Whale Feces, who was noticeably not present Tuesday, was installed January 3rd, 2023 after the new Ottawa Impact majority fired predecessor John Shea without warning. In his 13 months in Ottawa County, Gibbs faced at least one allegation of creating a toxic work environment brought forth by a sitting commissioner. More recently, Whale Feces was accused of age discrimination after a controversial executive aide hire in August. The move inspired a lawsuit from a finalist for the position who had more qualifications than the younger candidate hired. Whale Feces was selected by Ottawa Impact founders Joe Moss and Sylvia Rodea. His hiring was part of a series of controversial changes made during the group's inaugural meeting, including the elimination of the county's Department of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, changing the county motto from where you belong to where freedom rings, firing longtime county corporation counsel Doug Van Essen ahead of his planned retirement, and the attempted demotion of health officer Adeline Hambley, which led to a separate ongoing lawsuit. Things quickly soured between Gibbs and non-OI commissioners. In March, Commissioner Jacob Bonema filed a complaint with Human Resources after a verbal altercation with Gibbs, during which Gibbs told Bonema to, quote, "get out of my face," end of quote. The exchange was overheard by a reporter from WZZM television, which reported on the incident the same day. After an investigation by an outside legal firm, Human Resources Director Marcy Verbeek concluded the evidence gathered during the investigation, quote, "did not substantiate the claim of harassment," end of quote, and said, quote, "the findings indicate there was no violation of our organization's harassment policy or any applicable laws," end of quote. Moss later censured Bonema for abusing his authority in filing the complaint. Gibbs continued his contentious relationship with Bonema and other non-OI commissioners in the months that followed, often interrupting them during meetings and refusing to answer their questions. Through it all, Moss and Rodea seemed continued to back their chosen administrator until January 2024, when Whale Feces' personal attorney emailed Moss warning should the board discuss, quote, "changing Mr. Gibbs' employment status with Ottawa County," end of quote, his contract would be strictly followed. Aaron Davis of Butzel Long wrote to Moss, quote, "as you know and your lawyer should know, there is no basis to terminate my client for cause. Should the board or its lawyers attempt to get creative in that vein, be advised that the full extent of legal options available to Mr. Gibbs will be used to ensure the board ceases to violate Mr. Gibbs' constitutional, statutory, and contractual rights any further than it already has to date," end of quote. The letter came ahead of a planned closed session in January to quote, "consult with corporate counsel regarding the trial or settlement strategy in connection with Kimball versus Ottawa County of Ottawa," end of quote. On October 24th, Ryan Kimball, a finalist for an executive aide position to Gibbs, sued in Ottawa County's 20th Circuit Court alleging age discrimination when the administrator hired a younger candidate, 23-year-old Jordan Epperson, with fewer qualifications than the county required in its job posting. During a termination hearing for Hambley, commissioners heard testimony from former Deputy Administrator Patrick Waterman as well as Verbeek, in which they described concerning behavior when Epperson was interviewed. Waterman said, quote, "to my recollection, Mr. Epperson raised support for Ottawa Impact in his interviews," end of quote. He added that Epperson believed ethics, quote, "depend on who you're working for," end of quote, and that government positions like the role he was interviewing for are absolutely political. The Holland Sentinel reported in early September that heavily redacted emails from Verbeek to Gibbs and Waterman indicated differences of opinion as to who should have been offered the job. In the emails, Gibbs told Verbeek on June 15th to make an offer to Epperson. The next day, Verbeek asked for an additional meeting with the hiring committee, quote, "to discuss options prior to moving forward," end of quote. Her statements were almost entirely redacted by Corporation Counsel. Only 2 sentences were released of the 2-page email, along with a chart showing Epperson's qualifications as they compared to the other finalist, Kimball. When asked if Whale Feces mentioned Epperson's age and being able to easily boss him around, a fact Kimball alleges in his lawsuit, Waterman testified the comment, quote, "was made in the first interview when we asked Gibbs what it was about Mr. Epperson that he liked. We all said age shouldn't make a difference," end of quote. After the board emerged from a closed session January 16th, there was no mention of Whale Feces. Moss made a motion to enter mediation with Kimball's attorney, then moved to create a subcommittee of commissioners to advise negotiations. Whale Feces has a clause in his contract that says that he may be terminated at any time for cause, defined as intentional fraud, dishonesty, gross misconduct, or willful malfeasance in connection with his performance. However, the board may also fire him without cause if they provide a 90-day written notice. If the board were to fire Gibbs, he would receive a lump sum severance payment of 9 months' pay, as well as 9 months of health insurance. If he were to be terminated for cause, he would receive no severance, according to the contract. Davis wrote to Moss, quote, "To be clear, there is no scenario where the board's adverse conduct against Mr. Gibbs is not put under a microscope by a court of competent jurisdiction if it does not regain its senses and begin treating Mr. Gibbs with dignity," end of quote. Whale Feces contract runs through January 3, 2026. So he's going to be around for a while, unfortunately. Till he gets fired. Then I'm going to laugh. And then we have another story about that same meeting. This is Mitchell Boltman writing for the Holland Sentinel, dated February 13th. In addition to taking a pair of actions related to Administrator John Whale Feces Gibbs, the Ottawa County Board of Commissioners discussed and approved several items during a nearly 5-hour meeting Tuesday, February 13th. Months after filing a religious discrimination lawsuit against the board, Reverend Jared Kramer was in attendance Tuesday to give the opening invocation. A pastor at St. John's Episcopal Church in Grand Haven, Kramer filed this federal lawsuit in October 2023, claiming board chair Joe Moss used his position as chair to, quote, endorse a particular set of religious beliefs and exclude a particular set of religious beliefs, end of quote. He claims to have emailed Moss in May and sent him a letter by certified mail in August requesting to lead the invocation and received no response. An invitation to lead the invocation was extended in November after the lawsuit was filed. The lawsuit remains active. In his prayer Tuesday, Kramer directly referenced previous actions of the board, including changing the motto and closing the DEI department. Here's what he said, quote, "God, in particular, I pray for those who have been and continue to be impacted by decisions of this board. I pray for families and households that are struggling because of reduced resources in the health department, especially those who will be more food insecure, those who will struggle to get the mental health support they need. I pray for people of color in our country who, when they saw our motto of where you belong taken away, along with our Department of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, began to wonder once more if Holland can still be a home for them, if they still belong in a place where freedom does not ring for everyone," end of quote. He also prayed for members of the LGBTQ plus community, quote, "whose attempts to understand who they are have been maligned and increasingly don't feel safe, much less welcome in the community," end of quote. He continued, quote, "Above all, loving God, I pray that decency, love, and justice would once more come to the forefront of how our county operates, how we treat one another, and how those in power allocate resources and talk about vulnerable and marginalized groups. I know we can do better, God, if we open our hearts to your love and let that love transform us into agents of your healing," end of quote. Beautiful. Love it. Prior to approving the agenda, Commissioner Doug Zylstra introduced 5 motions to add items. Each was voted down. The items included a contract with the Lakeshore Regional Entity for Substance Abuse Prevention work that was tabled by the Finance Committee in December, a public health position approved by Human Resources but not by Finance, a resolution for funding the Ottawa Food Coordinator, an ARPA funds audit approved by the Finance Committee last week, and a cost of service report also approved by the Finance Committee last week. The first 2 motions were voted down 2-9, with only Zylstra and Roger Bergman supporting. Rebecca Curran and Jacob Bonema supported the Ottawa food motion, which failed 4-9. Zylstra was the lone yes vote on his final 2 motions. Moss took issue with Zylstra presenting items that hadn't been mentioned to him beforehand. After Zylstra's first motion, he said, quote, "None of whatever these items have been brought to the chair before this point. I've told Commissioner Zylstra that I would simply oppose randomly bringing items back during the meeting without having any prior discussion with the chair. Zylstra said he's brought items to Moss in the past that haven't been placed on the agenda. Zylstra said, quote, "If I have assurance that agenda items passed to the chair with due consideration will be placed on the agenda, I have no problem returning to that," end of quote. Moss responded, quote, Commissioner Zylstra, I'm not going to simply add any item that you asked to be put on the agenda. I consider each item independently. You have not given the courtesy of even that in this situation. End of quote. Oh, you, Joe Moss, you arrogant. The agenda for Tuesday was adjusted just prior to the meeting to add 2 items related to Gibbs who did not attend. Those items, approval of an outside legal firm to address a letter from Gibbs and a hiring and transfer freeze for his office, passed 11-0 and 10-1 respectively. Zylstra voted against the hiring freeze. Several items were taken off Tuesday's consent agenda and discussed as separate agenda items. Bergman motioned to remove the items from consent, saying they should have been brought as action items in the first place, since the committees that gave them initial approval no longer have a majority of commissioners. Most of the items, including some staffing updates and parks construction projects, were approved without issue. Commissioners did make adjustments to a proposed budget calendar. A trio of work sessions around the county's capital improvement plan and budget plan for August were adjusted to be full board work sessions instead of committee hearings. That motion passed 11-0. Bonham motioned to table approving a request for proposals for strategic planning work, saying he had questions for Gibbs, who was absent. That motion failed 5-6, with Bonham, Zylstra, Bergman, Curran, and Roger Belknap supporting. Moss, Sylvia Rodea, Allison Miedema, Lucy Ebel, Gretchen Cosby, and Kendra Wenzel voting against. Issuing the RFP passed by a 7-4 vote, with Moss, Rodea, Miedema, Ebel, Cosby, Wenzel, and Curran supporting. The board also heard department reports from Community Mental Health, the Department of Public Health, and the Department of Veterans Affairs. Although Ottawa Food wasn't added to the agenda, it was discussed later in the meeting. Administrative Health Officer Adeline Hambley mentioned the program during her report. Bonema asked Corporate Counsel Jack Jordan if the health officer was allowed to move unused funds to fill the coordinator position. Jordan said it was an interesting question and he would work with finance to answer it. Bonema asked if that could happen this week, and Jordan said he'd talk to Fiscal Services Director Karen Karasinski later in the day. Hambley noted funding the department receives from the state is restricted to certain areas of service. For example, she said, funds for septic system work can't be rerouted to pay for the Ottawa Food Coordinator. Following the close of the second public comment section, Moss offered a statement to the board. In general, the board does not respond to public comment. Moss said, quote, I'd like to thank the board for enduring the attacks and bullying by the left and Democrats. Bullshit. We're just telling it like it is. Quote, I have heard attacks calling conservative Republican commissioners things like heinous, stupid, dangerous, evil, morons, idiots, etc. Well, you've got that right. Hey, it's correct. They're all those things and more. Moss acknowledged a member of the crowd yelling out fascists, good for him, or her, whoever did it, and alleged one public comment speaker was mouthing inappropriate words toward him during the meeting. Before moving on to the next agenda, he said, quote, anyway, commissioners, thank you. Continue to do the right things even in the face of bullying and attacks, verbal attacks from the left. Focused on freedom, and thank you very much. End of quote. F*** you. Hole. All right, we got one final story that we need to get to. This is John King writing for the Michigan Advance. This is dated February 12th out of Lansing, Michigan. This is great news here. A state lawmaker whose boosting of a racist conspiracy theory drew the rebuke of fellow legislators as well as Governor Gretchen Whitmer has been stripped of his office staff, funds, and committee assignment. In a release issued Monday morning, Michigan House Speaker Joe Tate, Democrat of Detroit, said he was taking action against State Representative Josh Shriver, Republican of Oxford, for his, quote, sustained campaign of racist rhetoric and hate speech, end of quote, posted on social media. In a statement, Tate said, quote, I will not allow the Michigan House of Representatives to be a forum for the proliferation of racist, hateful, and bigoted speech. Representative Shriver has a history of promoting debunked theories and dangerous rhetoric that jeopardizes the safety of Michigan residents and contributes to a hostile and uncomfortable environment for others. The House of Representatives is the people's house, and all Michiganders should look upon this body and take pride in how we conduct ourselves. It is also a workplace, and I have a responsibility to make sure the employees of the House feel safe and secure. End of quote. The action follows Shriver's posting late Tuesday on X of a graphic of the Great Replacement Theory, which states that a conspiracy is targeting white Americans and Europeans to be replaced by non-white populations, often through immigration or interracial relationships. It has become a prominent talking point among far-right white nationalists and has often been cited by the perpetrators of mass violence, including the 2018 Pittsburgh synagogue shootings that killed 11 Jewish worshipers, the 2019 mass shooting at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas that killed 23 people, almost all of them Hispanic, and the 2022 mass shooting in a grocery store in Buffalo, New York, which targeted black patrons and killed 10 people. Shriver responded to the initial criticism from Democrats like State Representative Kelly Breen of Novi and State Representative Noah Arbit of West Bloomfield by doubling down on his support of the theory, prompting public rebukes from Tate and eventually even Whitmer and Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist. Tate said as a result of Shriver's actions, he will withhold his office allotment and reassign the representative staff and will remove him from the House Natural Resources, Environment, Tourism, and Outdoor Recreation Committee, Shriver's lone committee assignment. Tate added the resources typically made available to a representative will instead be held by the House Business Office. Tate said, quote, such resources are provided at the discretion and pleasure of the Speaker. Shriver will fulfill his responsibility as a representative through his ability to cast a vote in the House of Representatives, end of quote. Requests for comment have been made to Shriver as well as the office of House Minority Leader Matt Hall, Republican of Richland Township, but have yet to be returned. However, Shriver did post later on Monday in response to the sanctions on his X account. He said, quote, I don't think retweeting the Great Replacement graphic was racist, especially since I'm not and never have been a racist. Well, that's the excuse of racist to begin with. Well, I have a black friend, so I can't be racist. Let me continue. So I cannot offer a fake political apology for views I don't hold. I'm a child of God. I'm a Christian. Humans of all races are united under a universal invitation to salvation by Jesus Christ. Anyone hurt by his tweet, please don't be. End of quote. Yeah, very white Christian of you. The last time a member of the Michigan House was subject to these kinds of penalties was in 2019 when then State Representative Larry Inman, Republican of Williamsburg, was indicted on charges of attempted extortion, bribery, and lying to the FBI in connection on his vote on the state's prevailing wage law. He also was stripped of his committee assignments, had his staff reassigned, and office funds returned on order of then House Speaker Lee Chatfield, Republican of Levering. While Inman was later acquitted of lying to the FBI, a mistrial was declared on the other charges, although he remained exiled from his caucus and left office at the end of 2020 after his term expired. A jury exonerated him on the remaining corruption charges just last month. That's going to be it for this week. I'm Darren Gibson. Please support independent media, the First Amendment, and a woman's right to choose.
The stations that carry Southpaws do not necessarily share the opinions expressed on the show. Southpaws is protected by the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution and is copyrighted by Big D Entertainment. All rights reserved.